Good evening and welcome to Moving from Striving to Thriving, taking control of your physical and mental health. Tonight is the third event hosted by the Town of Cochrane Social Recovery Task Force, and we are very excited to be offering this important community conversation. My name is Deb Maxwell, and I am a community programmer with Cochrane FCSS in the area of neighborhood inclusion. On behalf of the Social Recovery Task Force, I would like to welcome our guest speakers and thank all of you for joining us for this live discussion. The Social Recovery Task Force was established this May by the Town of Cochrane Mayor and Council to assist in the social recovery of our community. The task force is responsible for creating opportunities to support and enhance the well-being, safety, and resilience of our residents. The beginning work of the task force was forced to conduct an environmental scan to identify emerging needs and service gaps. The task force developed and implemented 2 surveys, one for nonprofit organizations and a survey for community residents to help to understand the social, emotional, and financial impacts of COVID-19. We received a tremendous response to the survey, which helped us identify several key areas that we, as a task force, could offer support to the community. We heard about financial struggles, challenges associated with isolation, and the impact that not seeing friends and family was having. We heard about loneliness and the worry that people have for their own health and for the health of those they love. It is also interesting to note that we discovered that the pandemic brought about some positive changes to our community as well. We heard that pandemic brought our community together to provide support and offer help to our neighbors. We heard positives about the world and slowing down. We heard that pandemic also allowed us to focus on our relationships and our families. And we also had some time to try new activities and to do those things on our list we never seemed to get the chance to do. We took all of this information that we heard, and we are doing our best to respond. The task force has been offering monthly sessions to engage the community in conversation, providing information and resources to ensure that people have the knowledge and the support that they require. On behalf of the task force, I would like to thank our panelists. We have 3 very dedicated professionals and community members here with us tonight to share information, tips, and strategies to help ensure that we are looking after our physical and mental health during this uncertain time. Tonight you will hear from Dr. Corellis, a family physician in Cochrane, naturopathic Dr. Greg Sikorsky, and Hera Cowie, mental health clinician and social worker with Cochrane Mental Health and Addictions. Each panelist will provide a 20-minute presentation. Then following their presentation, we will be available to answer any questions that you have. You can ask your questions by emailing srtf@cochrane.ca or by putting them in the Facebook Live chat. To start, it is my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Corrales. She is a family physician with a special interest in child psychiatry, pain medicine, geriatric medicine, and palliative care. Her talk will focus on our body's psychological response to prolonged stress, self-care and self-management strategies, and COVID updates. Please help me welcome Dr. Corrales.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being part of this conversation and joining us today and for allowing me to be part of this conversation. I would like to start out by thanking the task force for the amazing and tireless work they're doing both behind and in front of the scenes to keep the community of Cochrane healthy and well-informed and unified over the course of these past few months. I would also like to thank them for not being too deterred by my talk in August and for extending the invitation for me to speak again. It is my honor to be here to be able to start the night out with some fun science. I've been tasked tonight with detailing the physiologic effects of chronic stress on the body and on the mind. And as I hold a physiology degree, I was only too keen, and I'm a major biology nerd as well, so I'm too happy to be here. Most importantly, though, I feel the topic is essential and exceptionally relevant at this stage of the game. We are 10 months in, and our stresses today are different than they were in March. And considering that, I, just like all of the other frontline clinicians all over the globe, and helping patients and loved ones deal with the fallout of chronic stress and all of its health effects and considerations, this is a good time to sit down and regroup and take stock of where we're at. So without further delay, I will present physiologic effects of chronic stress, otherwise entitled, Why Am I Drinking So Much? There's not much of that. So it's worth defining what stress is here. Stress is a normal reaction to a threat or perceived threat in our environments. It is the body's normal way of preparing you for action and for ramping up your fight or flight response. In our hunter-gatherer days, that meant that while you're in the field picking berries and you looked up and saw a saber-toothed tiger, your body would mount the appropriate response to keep you alive, either by getting the heck out of dodge or picking up a rock and fighting the saber-toothed tiger, depending on what your personality is. Nowadays, the threat of a saber-toothed tiger is a bit abstract, but we have threats of a different nature in the 21st century, and the physiology is the same. So I saw, no, that's fine. I did see this categorization system while I was searching online, and I think it's quite relevant for this talk, so I stole it for my talk today. There are 4 major life stresses. Number 1 can be categorized as major life changes, and you can Google these anywhere. These are things such as divorce, moving, the birth of a child. The second is catastrophic events, such as natural disasters, and COVID and global pandemics can be classified in this manner, or man-made disasters, such as car accidents. The third are the daily stresses that we go through every single day, the work deadlines, getting the kids to activities on time. And I really enjoy as well that they categorize the fourth form of stress as the ambient stress that we all feel, just the light and the background noise that we all feel every day of our lives. Now, while it's easy to categorize the COVID pandemic into natural disasters and catastrophes, as I just have, COVID truly has touched all of us in all of these domains and has manifested in every possible type of stress we can encounter. Major life changes now include unexpected death and illness of loved ones, or the fear of that. Businesses are folding left and right, and all of the financial stresses associated with that is now part of our daily life. Daily stresses also involve school, how to respond if your kid gets sick, how much time to take off work, if you can take 4 days off, 10 days off, 21 days off, whatever that might be, and how you're going to get around that. Even the most basic get-together involves a lot of planning, a lot of agonizing over who can come, who needs to be masked, who's going to bring the wipes, all of those considerations. If your kids aren't going to school, they're now constantly in the home as well, and they form part of the ambient noise at home all the time. I would also include the daily COVID updates, the misinformation and the news of the pandemic, and all the effects it's having all over the globe, and the uncertainty that entails as part of the ambient stresses and the ambient noise we are all learning to live with every single day. So COVID does touch every part of our lives in every manner. The reason why I'm being so emphatic about defining the effect of COVID in our lives is because I want to validate how we're all feeling. Patients come in all the time and they say, Dr. Kraulis, I am anxious, I'm stressed, I'm depressed, I am drinking too much, I am angry at my husband. That's not new. I'm short with my kids, and I don't know why nothing is happening. And I would argue, based on these definitions, that something is happening all the time. Your hair doesn't have to be on fire for you to be stressed. This is happening all the time. So it's okay to feel the way you're feeling. It is natural, and I'm about to tell you why. So, back to whatever you were doing in the field with the tiger. It's worth also defining what short-term versus long-term stress is. When you are in the field with the tiger and you look up, your HPA system is activated. Your hypothalamus releases cortisol-releasing factor, your pituitary releases ACTH, and these tiny little organs on top of your kidneys release cortisol, norepinephrine, and epinephrine to mount a normal, adaptive, and appropriate response. This leads to increased focus, increased alertness, increased attention, and it tells you something important is happening, and it allows you to take action. Without this type of stress, you wouldn't have met that important deadline today at noon. You would not have studied or passed all your exams in university. You might not be married because you would have done terribly at your first date and not made a great impression. So this is this is normal things that happen to us day to day. The problem is that these stresses are not resolving nowadays. So stress, when it happens over a long period of time, it doesn't stop, or if it happens repeatedly in a set period of time, is detrimental, and that is called chronic stress. I made a little note here of a little phenomenon called metabolic uncoupling as well, and that's something that will come up in my talk when I detail some of the physiology. Metabolic uncoupling basically increases the detrimental effects of our stress response. It's when your body kicks into high gear, but there's no tiger. So the physiology is all there, and you're really excited, and you're really focused, and everything is going 100 miles an hour, but there's no tiger. So instead, you pick up a bag of chips, and you go downstairs, and you binge watch the whole first season of This Is Us for the 10th time, and the physiology is still there, but it's not going anywhere, it's not resolving. Okay, so I'm just going to be really depressing here, and I'm going to go system by system as to how your body is affected, again, both in the short term and in the long term by stress. So imagine that you are sitting quietly in your pajamas and somebody from the task force calls you and asks you to speak in public. You become alert, your heart races, your lungs expand, and you get ready to run away. Simultaneously, your peripheral vasculature constricts, your hands get cold and clammy, and this happens to divert all of your oxygen and all of your resources to your heart, your lungs, and your brain for that fight or flight response. In the short term, you nail your presentation. In the long term, after 10 months of too much Netflix and too much cardiovascular activation, you get hypertension, your heart that has been working so hard against constricted vessels remodels, the blood crashing against your constricted blood vessels causes inflammation and changes the way your vessel inner lining functions and responds. It changes the hormones and the chemicals it excretes, and your vessels become vulnerable to plaque formation, and you're at increased risk of heart attack or stroke. The gut, the GI system, has its own nervous system, and this can also respond to stress. You don't need to digest when you run from a tiger, so GI vessels contract and can't absorb nutrients as well. And as the activation continues, you're also more prone to symptoms of IBS, and that is characterized by abdominal pain, bloating, and changes in your bowel habits, meaning either increased constipation or increased diarrhea. And can you this slide, please? Thank you. From a survival and evolutionary standpoint, immunity and reproduction are heavily resource demanding. So when the volume gets turned up in survival, those systems get turned down. With your natural defenses low, you're prone to inflammation and illness. Studies have actually shown decreased wound healing in people with chronic stress. And I thought I'd toss this one in here in case the males listening had stopped paying attention. Remember the vasculature and the damage that I talked about? That one's a big vessel, and a lot of men are presenting with erectile dysfunction. As far as joints and MSK are involved, as both stress and chronic pain are both mediated by an overstimulated central nervous system, chronic pain increases. And of course, we know that joint pain and inflammation go hand in hand. And so this is also compounded by lack of exercise and everything we're going to talk about later on in terms of management. So pain is increasing. And finally, in order to survive the tiger attack, glucagon and cortisol are secreted. Their role is to mobilize glucose and carbohydrates from your body's stores, primarily your liver. These are used as fast sources of energy for your driving heart to burn. The increased drive for more carbohydrates, not only from your stores, also means increased carbohydrates from chips, and that's why you're eating so much. It's one of the reasons. Obviously, again, this goes hand in hand with some of the mood concerns. Eric will talk a little bit more about some of the depression, some of the downward spiral that's going on in our lives today. And in the long run, increased, again, with the uncoupling, increased blood glucose and the opposition to insulin by cortisol make you more prone to diabetes. That, in addition to the hypertension I talked about earlier and the plaque formation that I talked about earlier, makes for a very unhappy heart. And if that wasn't depressing enough, many of the direct and indirect effects of stress on the brain have been worked out, and that's not pretty either. especially when it comes to the effect of chronic stress on our cerebral cortices, the parts of our brain that serve to control our emotional or reactive primitive brains. In particular, the frontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that is affected in ADHD, for example, and is the seat of our executive functioning, has a lot of cortisol receptors. The frontal cortex has been shown to be physically affected as the cells atrophy and die over time. This does take more than 10 months, mind you, but it's eventual if chronic stress isn't mitigated. But more immediately, what you will experience is decreased judgment, decreased attention, decreased concentration, decreased ability to reason and emotionally regulate, decreased impulse control, and it won't be as easy for you to remember or learn anything. In the posterior part of the frontal cortex, we have a little area called the anterior cingulate gyrus, and that regulates mood and emotion along with other areas of our brain. And when that becomes dysregulated, we see a lot of the emotional responses that I'm seeing a lot in my office right now. Anger, depression, anxiety. A quick word about anger, which I'm not sure if Eric will elucidate on, but it is kind of a secondary emotion that often hides things like fear. But I did want to point out that in males, it's often also the first manifestation of depression. So where a lot of women present with that sort of gloomy, black cloud type, sad presentation, a lot of men will be mixed. So remember that men will act out with anger if they're depressed. Once these start, stress behavior begins and then reinforces the mood, and then a downward spiral can begin that is difficult to get a handle of, and the mind state becomes bigger and self-perpetuating. So for example, when you're anxious and you're afraid of everything, you're going to look at everything through this lens of fear. If you're depressed and you're not interested in doing anything, you're going to go and isolate yourself. You're going to play video games more. You're not going to seek out that help or that socialization or any of the good coping skills that I'm sure everyone's aware of. And then again, this downward spiral spins and spins. This is where we see a lot of poor coping, and self-medication comes into play here as people try to relax and to decrease the strain they're feeling every day. And then we come back around to answer that that's why you're drinking so much. So, thank you. The gentlemen that are speaking after me will touch more on this, but I would be amiss if I didn't go into a little bit of detail as to what to do and how to manage your stress. And I won't go into great amount of detail because you guys are the pros in that. But these are conversations I'm having every day, so I think it's definitely worth speaking to right now. It would be lovely to be that guy on the lake and, just go somewhere and isolate. But I think, for all of us, the idea is to have that mindset, but in our everyday lives. So what I wanted to say today is to ask people to break the downward spiral. Okay, so identify your poor coping mechanisms and set goals to cope better. And those things you'll learn today. If you're drinking too much, make goals to not drink as much or drink less. If you're not exercising, make a goal to just do a little bit every single day. Do you remember that lack of control piece that we talked about in terms of stress? Work within your locus of control, identify it, find something in your life that you can control. Learn a new language, volunteer, find a purpose, do something you've never done. As far as exercise goes, as a physician, I'm always reminding my patients to start where you are. Usually after an incredibly inspiring talk by their family doctor, and I've done this too, patients will go out and buy a $1,000 gym membership, and of course, you hate it. But you drag yourself there once every 2 weeks, every now and then, and because you hate it, you stop, right? So I always remind them to start small and start where you are. If you're not exercising at all, exercise for 5 minutes. Put your shoes on, go for a walk. But exercise for 5 minutes every single day. After you do that every single day for 2 weeks, on day 15, 5 minutes is going to be a breeze. So you go, I'm going to go 10 minutes. And then in a week, you go 15 minutes. Or you say, 10 minutes is good, but I'm going to go up a hill. Right? So work with where you are. Pick something you love, because then you'll do it every day. And you don't have to force yourself. Eat well. be smarter than your primitive carbohydrate chip, pumpkin pie blizzard craving brain and fuel your body with nutrient-rich foods. Go outside. So we are so lucky in Alberta to have, so much natural beauty around us, and that cuts out the ambient stress immediately. Go outside and enjoy it. Seek out fellowship, seek out friends and company, and laugh. And then the last thing I'll say is, actually it's not the last thing I'll say, the next slide's the last thing I'll say, but I would also encourage people to practice some sort of mindfulness, some kind of presence or breathing practice, something like yoga, something to take your mind away from worrying about the future, worrying about the past, and to put you into the present and say, and remind yourself that you're okay where you are right now. I'm not nodding very well, sorry. Finally, and most importantly, again, reach out. Whether it's to family or friends, please tell people that you're not doing well if you're not. I'd also like to take time to remind you that family doctors are not just for coughs and colds. There are over 30 of us in the city, all amazing people. I'm lucky to call myself part of them. We, over the past 20 years, have been built up by our PCNs, our primary care networks, to have the tools and the resources and the training to help with anxiety and depression and counseling. We have teams around us, including counselors and nurses and pharmacists, social workers if need be. So if you need us, we're there, and we have lots to help you with. Counseling, of course, and I have some internet resources, which I didn't bother to detail on my slides, but I think in this forum we will have the opportunity to post those at some point. So I will be doing that after my presentation. Now the last piece is the COVID updates. And I am going to just do a rapid fire because we're all a little sick of this, and there's a few little points that I just pulled out there a bit relevant to, again, 10 months out. Before I go into a lot of these COVID updates, I would like to thank Dr. Mike Allen and Dr. Mike Holber. They are part of the group through the U of A and the Alberta College of Family Physicians that hold a conference every year called the Practical Evidence for Informed Practice. They are evidence gurus, and they just held their conference this past weekend, and so I basically stole these points from them as the most updated information I could find. So the data is still there, and actually there's more data to say that masks are effective, so please wear them. Hydroxychloroquine is not effective. Please stop asking for it. As we move forward, I would like to just say to please beware of bad treatments. Please remember that if things aren't announced in the space of Health Canada, the FDA, all of those sort of governmental bodies, it's probably not true or effective or safe. Just please be aware of where you get your information. And remember that scientific reporting is fast and flashy and sensationalist. Real science is slow and methodical, but it's definitely worth waiting for. So I know we're super impatient right now, but just wait and watch. As things fall out here 10 months out, it looks like the infection fatality of COVID is about 0.7%, which is higher than the flu, which I've seen calculated to be about 0.1 to 0.3%. And that number is small and it's easy to minimize and scoff at, but when you think that it means 50 million people, that's a little more serious. And just as I was coming in today, I was listening to the CBC update as well, and that confirmed my last point. Immunity, unfortunately, does not last, just like with every other coronavirus type. It's only a couple months, unfortunately. So when the vaccines do come out, it's going to be yearly likely, and we're not going to reach meaningful herd immunity without that vaccine. So until we get one, wear your mask, social distance, wash your hands, and please take care of yourselves and of each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jennifer. I just cleaned your germs away. Dr. Greg Sikorsky has recently joined Synergy Collaborative Health, located in Cochrane. He also sees patients at Healthy by Nature, located in Calgary. It was after getting into a couple of car accidents that Dr. Greg has learned the value of a holistic approach. Naturopathic medicine has helped him to integrate modern scientific knowledge with traditional healing wisdom to promote self-healing. Dr. Greg has incorporated Embrace Health as a tagline. This uses the idea that we can be one with our body, embrace challenges, and learn what messages our body is telling us. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Greg. You don't want my germs either, Dr. Greg. You don't know where I've been.
Hello. Thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to speak with you all. I never see you all. So just wanted to make the announcement that I did join Synergy here in town with Dr. David Sinha and on a collaborative team. I'm very excited. I just started last week there. And I can't wait to learn more and be on this team of professionals. One thing I did learn is, did you hear that ants are immune during this global pandemic? It's because they have little antibodies.
Oh.
Did you hear about the one of quarantine? It's an inside joke. Okay, enough of the coronavirus jokes. We're all getting sick of them. I'm here to talk to you about the brain and gut connection. Many people don't know that there's a connection between the brain and the guts. But think of the last time you had butterflies in your stomach. Usually this is a time when we're feeling very stressed. There's something else going on and we're nervous. This is our brain telling our guts to redirect its blood flow to other parts of our body so that we can have that fight or flight reaction. So that we can run from that tiger or fight that tiger like Dr. Krauss was talking about. But our guts is saying, hold on a second, we still need energy in this area. So it's kind of like sending a text message to our brain. Our brain goes, okay, I'm dealing with this tiger. I see that you're telling me to do something, but I got to deal with this shit first. Excuse my language. Big. Wow, I didn't expect that. And so there are different ways that the gut can also tell the brain, hey, pay attention to me. It's a little bit slower, but it's called the parasympathetic nervous system. It's what enables the digestion, salivation, and release bile in our gut. It's this vagus nerve connection that is connecting the two. So the brain talks to the gut talks to the brain through this connection. The other way it can talk is through neurotransmitters. These are chemical compounds. It's kind of like that vinegar and baking soda reaction to make volcanoes. We need a certain amount of vinegar, a certain amount of baking soda, so that we get this bubbling up reaction, this chemical reaction. Two of those neurotransmitters are called GABA and serotonin. These are both produced in our gut. These are just a couple examples of many different neurotransmitters in our system. These are usually made from proteins, and so if we have our nerves in our system, it's kind of like our hand here. We have the body, we have these dendrites, and then we have the rest of the body and the head, which is down here. And we have all these different nerves, and they don't quite touch each other, but they help elicit responses. And there's the chemicals that are from the dendrites that go to the other nerve that tell to elicit a response. So sometimes we want a stimulating response, sometimes we want a more inhibitory response. GABA is a more inhibitory response. It can do some stimulating, but it mostly does this nice calming effect. It helps improve focus, it helps increase relaxation. If we don't have enough of it, it can cause anxiety. Without it, we don't control our nerves, our motor function, or our visual function as well. It is one neurotransmitter that is in the treatment for epilepsy. Serotonin is another neurotransmitter that is produced in the gut. It is very important. It helps stabilize mood. It helps us feel content. It helps us feel happy. It helps with regulating our body. So it helps us learn when to go to sleep, when to wake up. It also helps with our bowel movements, saying, okay, let's squeeze that gut and push our stool out. If we are too low, it is linked with depression, anxiety, and some other mental disorders. The first one is the vagus nerve. The second way that the gut talks to the brain is the neurotransmitters. The third way is the short chain fatty acids that we get absorbed. So these are carbohydrates that aren't digested very well. They're non-digested carbohydrates, also known as certain fibers. It's kind of like those prebiotics that everybody hears about. It's food for the microbes in our system. And once this gets in our bloodstream, it can have lots of effects. So the biggest one is in our head, we have this net called the blood-brain barrier that prevents blood from getting into our brain. If this barrier isn't protected, if it's not kept well enough, it'll leak certain aspects into our brain and cause inflammation. It's very important. And the short chain fatty acids is able to do that. It helps repair the net and make sure that we're not getting that additional inflammation. The couple examples are acetate, propionate, and butyrate. It also helps reduce our appetite. It helps with stress and helps us with social disorders. And especially with COVID and us feeling so isolated, not sure how we want to interact with people, this really helps us calm our system down too. The fourth way that our gut talks to our brain is the microbes in it. So this is more the probiotics, for example. Probiotics, we kind of got to think of it like a garden. So we have our weeds, we have our vegetables, we have our fruits, and we also have flowers. They're all growing in a garden, and every one of us have this ecosystem in our gut. A lot of times people are focused on the weeds. The weeds are really bad, it's going to overgrow our system, so let's cut out these weeds, let's get rid of these weeds. But sometimes it's actually the flowers that are growing too much and cutting off the rest of the system, choking out the fruits, choking out the vegetables. And so we have this huge garden, but it's not very, it doesn't have a big variety, so we're not getting as much from it. So, and I'm going to go back to the weeds. So sometimes these weeds, the bad bacteria, will produce a compound called lipopolysaccharides. And if we get too much of it, it gets into our bloodstream and can lead to other disorders such as depression, dementia, and schizophrenia. So these are 4 different ways our gut talks to our brain and the rest of our system. And our gut is so important. It's our first line of defense, and that's one of the reasons why I believe masks are working as well as they are. A lot of times we're touching things, we're touching our face as we're eating, we are getting and ingesting these microbes. And acid, our stomach acid, is our first line of defense. So if we're feeling stressed, if we're not in the rest and digest stage, we're in that more fight or flight, our digestion goes down and we produce less acid, so we're not getting that chemical reaction to breaking down microbes. There's the next system, a little bit lower once it gets past the stomach, is in our intestines, and this is called the gut-associated lymphatic tissue. It's kind of like the armies that shoot up what gets past that first mechanism, that first low stomach acid aspect. Our guts are very, very important. They're very strong, they're very intelligent. So let's try and keep them as healthy as possible. So how do we do that? Dr. Corrales talked a little bit about that so far. My favorite one is the singing. Singing, whether we're in the shower, whether we're in the car, whether we're doing karaoke, that is one way that helps us get in the moment, get in the present, not thinking about the past, not thinking about the future, but staying here present. It also has vibrations that tickle this the vagus nerve, to help it calm down. Slow, deep breathing, that's another way to do this. We touched really briefly on laughing with Dr. Corrales' slides. I have some really great patients. I love the aspect of laughing. That's why I started off with a couple of really bad jokes. But jokes are really great. There's some awesome studies showing if we laugh 10 minutes a day, that helps reduce our stress. If we laugh 10 minutes a day, people with eczema, they can reduce their eczema by 50% by just laughing. So I have a lot of fun with telling my parents this with their kids. I had one parent that just brought up these fart videos that they will watch, and they've been trying to stop watching these fart videos, but the kids just love them. And I told them, no, I'm prescribing 10 minutes a day. You have to watch it 10 minutes a day. You can find something else, but we need a way to get these guys to laugh. There's other aspects, exercise. The 5 minutes a day is great. There are lots of great resources on Facebook right now. I found one group that we do Zoom yoga every morning. It's by donation. There are lots of different groups out there that do that. I learned how to do a headstand during COVID through Zoom. I've never been able to do that with my yoga practice before. Another friend of mine, they do something called Gaga dancing. It's this type of dance group. I don't know enough about it, but he now says he's in the best shape of his life. He has abs, and he's in his 40s. He's never had abs before, and just from dancing. And he started 5 minutes a day and is now doing an hour a day of just dancing. Acupuncture is a really good way. Another one is gargling. So at the end of your brushing your teeth, gargling for 10 minutes a day can also activate that nerve and help calm our system down. Another way to really help calm that down is called an I love you massage. So let's see. So we do a massage. We start where our bowels are on our left-hand side, and we do this massage deep down. And we're massaging our poop. We're massaging the stool, and we're slowly going up and up until we get our rib cage. So this is an I, and then we start back down, and we go back up and over. This is L for love, and then we go back down, across, and then down this side. So this is the U, and then at the end of it, you massage all the way down. This is about a 5-minute massage that really stimulates our digestion and can really make sure that we have at least a daily bowel movement. How do we help our neurotransmitters? So we can eat tryptophan foods. So like at Thanksgiving, when we're having our turkey or chicken, these are really helpful to help these neurotransmitters. L-glutamine is another one. Usually we find it in powders, but if we exercise, it releases L-glutamine from our muscles and gets it back into our guts. Proteins are very important. My favorite one right now is bone broth. Bone broth is proteins broken down into the amino acids. So amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. It's pretty easy to make. There's lots of recipes online. Usually we want to use organic bones as much as possible because there are some heavy metals in other bones. But if you don't have organic chicken or whatnot, use what you have. Exercise, as I mentioned again, very important. Now, we've talked about the vagus nerve, we talked about neurotransmitters, the short-chain fatty acids. This one I want to talk about with caution. So it's usually the fermented foods or fibers. Everybody talks about yogurt, fermented pickles, kombucha, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut. These are all really great fermented foods, but for some people, it's not good. So if you get lots of gas, if you get bloating, especially after 2 weeks, this might not be good for you. It goes back to that ecosystem in our guts of having that garden. The weeds have overtaken our garden, and you are feeding those weeds. So you have to be cautious. Sometimes even with fiber, if we have too much flaxseed, people with diverticulitis, it's these pockets in their guts, it will become infected. So be sure to talk to a healthcare professional about whether certain fibers are good for you. Another way to really help short chain fatty acids are whole grains. Whole grains, whether we go a lot of people are going grain-free, especially with gluten. And it makes sense with gluten. Gluten is a depressant. It can bring us down. It does affect our neurotransmitters. It does affect our system. So going gluten-free for some people might be a really good idea, but not for everybody because it does have lots of B vitamins in it. And B vitamins help our system work better and help us deal with stress, especially with the adrenal glands. That look after our cortisol and our epinephrine and the cortisone, and the other hormones. Another way is with probiotics. We also have to be a little cautious with that too, because a lot of probiotics, they have prebiotics in it or fermented aspects in it that may feed that garden. But probiotics can be really good. They reduce cholesterol, anxiety, depression, increase production of vitamin B, B12, producing the serotonin, and GABA. So these are all things I've talked about earlier that can really, really help. But we want to make sure you're taking the right probiotics because you might be just taking more and more of those flowers and then increasing more flower seeds. But if the flowers are choking out the garden, that's not going to help. One that I'm really excited about just learning is mouthwash. We want to avoid mouthwash. Mouthwash can kill some of the bacteria in our mouth, especially the ones that break down sulfur. Sulfur is really important for helping lower our blood pressure. So if we're killing off that bacteria, we can actually be increasing our stress because we're putting more pressure on our system by increasing our blood pressure. I'm wrapping up here. I'm almost done. There's so much to talk about. I'm so excited about this topic. Dr. Krause also talked about eating better, working on our diet. And so how do we do that? The rainbow diet is probably one of the easiest ways to eat. So looking at 5 different colors on our plate. Have something red, have something orange, have something yellow, have something green, and have something that is purple or blue. White, if we can avoid it, is probably going to be better. If we can find something black, like black garlic, black chia seeds, in Chinese medicine, that seems to help the kidneys a little bit more, which in turn helps the adrenal glands. But it's a really easy, simple way to help improve our diet. Another really nice diet to look at is the anti-inflammatory diet. Putting less pressure on our system. The more inflammation we have, the more it puts pressure on our brain. More inflammation, if we have it in our brain, causes more depression. Everybody's into the lectin diets, reducing lectins. I think that's a really great diet, but for, I believe it's the A-type blood, I like looking a little bit more at the blood type diet because it looks at other aspects and not just the lectins. The keto diet might be good for some. I'm throwing these out here. I'm not saying these are great for everybody. The keto diet seems to have really good studies around concussions, which is also putting more inflammation on the brain. So that's why I'm briefly talking about the keto right now. I'm really a big proponent of figuring out which foods are best for you. There's an elimination diet, which you eliminate most foods, go really, really bland, and slowly reintroduce foods to see how your body reacts to it. So it's almost like having rice, chicken, and salad for 6 weeks, and then adding eggs, adding dairy, adding different ingredients to see how your body reacts. Sometimes it might give you migraines. For some people, a really popular one is dairy. Dairy can cross the blood-brain barrier a little bit more, and or a component of it, and can stimulate this ADHD kind of reaction where it's really hard to focus. We're in all different directions, which doesn't really help if we're already feeling stressed. I'm a little bit lazy when it comes to the elimination diet. I rather do quick and fast, so I do something called food sensitivity testing. It is a little bit more pricey, but it is one way to work faster and better to figuring out which foods may be affecting us. There's still trial and error, but it can tell us if we have something called leaky gut, which then can help lead to leaky brain, which is that blood-brain barrier and affecting a little bit more of our nervous system. But that's not for everybody, and it is, as I said, a little bit it can be cost effective, but if we're having a hard time figuring out what's going on, this is kind of a next step if working on the anti-inflammatory diet, working on the rainbow diet isn't helping you. Quick note about omega-3s. Omega-3s are great. They're very anti-inflammatory. I usually like to have people avoid the omega-6s and omega-9s. They're very good for helping promote inflammation, a healing part of inflammation. It can help with certain skin diseases. It can also help with eczema and hormones and balancing out hormones. But if we're working on reducing inflammation, it might be a good idea to just use the omega-3s at this time. And then really listen to our body. This is one thing I really want to stress too. I love hearing my patients say, oh yeah, I poop maybe once a day, once every couple days. And I ask them about their day, why they might not want to go to the washroom. And they're afraid of the toilets at work, or they're on their Zoom and they can't press pause, or they have to go to the washroom, but they push it off. This is us telling our brain we're too stressed to go to the washroom. So it's putting us more in that fight or flight reaction. We're not listening to our body. So one way to help our body out is if you have to go poo, go poo. Take that sanitizer, sanitize that toilet if you need to. If you don't feel comfortable using a staff toilet, find some way to take a break and go home. It's very important. We should be going poo at least once a day. I try and get my patients to go once per meal. This is the most effective way to get our immune system working. And yeah, that is not standard North American diets. It's not the standard North America way, but this is where we should be getting our system onto. If something feels off, see somebody. We're all going to talk about that today. And I've mentioned a couple times, like probiotics, if you've gone 2 weeks with taking them and you feel worse, more bloating, see somebody. There's something else going on. If you feel butterflies in your stomach, pay attention to around you. Why are you feeling stressed? Our gut is there for a reason. It is trying to tell us something. Don't ignore it. Our bodies are smart. Yeah, so listen. So that's my presentation, and yeah, I look forward to the questions at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Greg. Dr. Greg, I have a joke for you.
Yay!
I'll tell you a coronavirus joke, but you'll have to wait 2 weeks to get it.
Yay!
Didn't have any bad words in it, though. Our final speaker tonight is Eric Howie. He's a mental health therapist and social worker with Cochrane Addiction and Mental Health. He lives in Cochrane with his family. His current work at the clinic focuses on children and youth. Please help me welcome Eric Howie.
The unmasking. Hello and welcome. Thank you for sticking with us tonight. Thank you to Dr. Greg and Dr. Corrales for their prior presentations. And most importantly, thank you for setting aside some time to focus on your health and well-being amidst what is a very stressful time for everybody. My name is Eric Howie. I'm a mental health therapist here in Cochrane. And I work at Cochrane Addiction and Mental Health. My kids attend local schools here. My son has now completed his 3rd COVID test. Yay. But he told me that he did better than some of the adults with the nose swab, so he was very proud of that. So we're going to finish up tonight by talking about how to take care of yourself when it feels like everything is falling apart. And a brief warning, a little bit of what I'll touch on at the end here is talking about suicide. Just so folks know that is coming at the end of the presentation tonight. And before we go on, I want to talk a little bit about my relationship with the topic of self-care. I actually struggled a lot making this presentation because ironically, I don't think I'm actually very good at self-care. I could be a lot better at it. It's hard to set aside time for ourselves in this world and to say, I need to do this to take care of myself. Especially when we've sort of elevated this idea that we need to be trying harder, we need to be working harder, we need to be doing more. And then conversely, if we're failing, then it becomes our fault. And the other reason I really struggled making this presentation is because of the equity and justice concerns that I have about this idea of self-care. Because self-care is not something that every person and every family has equal access to. Many self-care strategies that you'll hear about or you might think about, they require time or money or both. And I have such a privileged access to that as a white, able-bodied, employed male. And that's really different than what the experience is of somebody that's struggling to just manage to pay rent at the end of the month, or struggling to deal with, a house full of children in this new and dynamic COVID time, and making sure they get to school, that they have their masks, they have what they need, and all those different things that are going on. So I think self-care is harder than a hashtag on social media. And I think it's important that people recognize that self-care is not something that we sort of can succeed or fail at. My hope is that tonight, it's not about making you feel you have to do more, that somehow you need to be thriving in the face of a pandemic. My hope is that you leave here, finish the talk, recognizing that you're doing so much already, that sometimes in the face of a pandemic that upends your entire life, survival is a success. So with this in mind, let's think a little bit more about what self-care might look like during a pandemic. First, I want you to think about what self-care means to you. Why don't you take a moment at home if you're listening in and just reflect on what does that look like in your life? What have you done for self-care? What do you do for self-care? What have you tried to do for self-care? What do you wish you could be doing for self-care? I want you to just take a moment and think about that. And I also want you to think about how you're doing that now in your life. And so I'm just going to pause for a brief moment here and give you an opportunity to think and reflect on that. And now I want you to think about, go to the next slide. And now I want you to think about what we've lost because of COVID-19. What's changed? What were you doing that you might no longer be doing? At the time that we need our self-care the most, it is often the most inaccessible to many of us. Money, time, physical space, those have all changed for many families and many individuals as we adjust to these new realities of COVID. Before COVID-19 in March, I was on a personal hot streak of exercise. It was really good. I would use my lunch breaks. I would go to the gym, hop on the bike, put on a podcast, bike for 20 minutes, hop off, go back to work. It wasn't fancy, but I liked it, and it was working for me. And when COVID-19 hit, that stopped entirely. My lunch breaks became about, I needed to run errands for my family. I needed to go get groceries. I needed to get things done because there wasn't the opportunity to do those things at other time, and we needed to minimize risk in terms of exposure. So I stopped almost completely after COVID-19. And I can't really tell you honestly here tonight that I've restarted that, but I'll tell you about another success I have had with self-care. So I think it's important to recognize that self-care before COVID-19 and self-care today is different. And a lot of us are experiencing loss, and loss of access, loss of time, loss of money to these self-care activities. So what does it really mean, though, to take care of ourselves, to be kind to ourselves? And I guess this is one of the themes that I want you to be thinking about tonight when you think about self-care. So what does that word actually mean? It means to take care of ourselves. It means to be kind to ourselves. It doesn't mean a product on the store shelf. It doesn't mean a bubble bath. It doesn't mean some kind of specific action. It means being kind to ourselves. And more than anything else, if there's a message that you can take home from my talk tonight, it would to be kinder to yourself. Offer the kindness to yourself that you give to your friends and family. Hold back on some of that judgment about what you're doing or not doing, because we don't need that. So when I looked today on Instagram, hashtag self-care has crested 36 million posts. The exact number there is 36,622,096 posts as of about 11 a.m. this morning. And I'm sure that number's gone up. It's going up every minute. And we have to think about what is the message this sends to people as that's what they're seeing, right? That somehow I'm not succeeding because I'm not doing enough self-care, I'm not baking enough, I'm not reading enough, I'm not eating the right foods, I'm not taking care of me. And don't get me wrong, all those things are good for people. We've known for a long time, and we've heard already this evening about what works in terms of self-care and reducing stress. We know a lot about that. And it's not that all these things are good, it's not that these things aren't good for us, it's that we need to think a little bit more about the small actions that people can take. That we can start with 5 minutes of walking, 2 minutes of walking. That we can start by having a little bit of a rainbow on our plate. It doesn't have to be a complicated, big thing. That these small actions in the face of adversity take a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of strength to do that. And I think it's important to sort of move beyond this hashtag. So what is self-care if it's not a hashtag on Instagram? First of all, I'd offer you that one important piece of self-care, especially right now, is recognizing that a lot of us are having a normal response to abnormal life events. This is unlike anything we've gone through before. Nobody has lived through a time like this. And so to feel distressed or anxious or worried or scared, all of those things are normal. And I can't stress that enough. That our distress is real, it's valid, but we are in absolutely an abnormal time right now. And we have to be kind to ourselves and not judge the reactions that we're having, that our colleagues are having, that our friends are having too harshly. Because everybody is going through this in their own way and at their own pace. So how do you define self-care? What is it? What is self-care? According to the dictionary, it's any action to preserve or improve your health. I like this line a little bit more, and my underlining's moved off, but it's a protest against suffering. It's when you say, I'm going to do this one little small thing for me because that's going to be better for me than having another drink of alcohol or sitting down and watching another episode on Netflix or reaching for that easy bag of potato chips. Self-care is an action to stay alive, to survive. And sometimes it's an action against the pressure to just sort of let things be. It has to go beyond self-maintenance. And at its root, it's an act of self-kindness and self-compassion. So it can be helpful to break self-care down and think about it in 4 different dimensions. And we've kind of heard about this in different ways tonight. So I won't linger here, but I think thinking about, our physical self-care. So what does that look like? Our eating, our sleeping, our exercise, and also our physical spaces, right? What does it look like where we're working? What does it look like where we're living? And how does that affect us? Our emotional self-care, taking care of our hearts, our relationships, our connections, our friends, our family. Our mental self-care, taking care of our minds, keeping our minds engaged, challenging ourselves, engaging our curiosity, keeping ourselves sharp. Our spiritual self-care, taking care of our sense of purpose, of meaning, of what am I doing? Why am I here? Doesn't necessarily have to be religious in nature, but looking after those sort of bigger questions and sense of purpose in our life. Where am I going? What are my goals? Might involve meditation or prayer or journaling, learning, conversations with friends. So those are all the different ways somebody can think about self-care, and we don't have to be always working on each of those different ways in our lives, but thinking about those different aspects of self-care and understanding that we can take actions in all those different dimensions. So motivation when you are crushed. Finding motivation. My experience in counseling and therapy is that a lot of the people that I talk to and the families that I chat with often have some great ideas about what self-care could look like in their life, what they could be doing a little bit better of. I know for sure, absolutely, I should be back to exercising. But I haven't really found the motivation for that, if I'm honest. Because finding motivation is hard. It's tough to overcome that barrier and do the thing that is hard to do. So making change is hard. Doing something to take care of ourselves is tricky. And we don't need to succeed all of the time, but it's the trying that's important. And in my experience, it's best to start small and be aware of your forward momentum early. We can't focus on reaching the top of the mountain. We need to think about putting on our boots at the door or taking that first step on the trail. We have to build in social supports and encouragement. And here's where I've had some success. I've always loved reading. I've gone up and down with reading in my life. My biggest social support is my wife, and she's forced us to read in the evenings. And I did initially resist that, but it's been really awesome. And that social support has been key. Because when I go to pick up my phone or look at a screen, she's like, nope, can't do that in the bedroom, have to read. And so that social support can keep us accountable and keep us doing those things and making those changes that we need to make, right? And we can't punish ourselves for failures or setbacks. It's not going to be a straight line making change. It's going to look all over the place, topsy-turvy. And we have to reward successes as quick as possible. So when you have a success, find a way to reward that, acknowledge that, and celebrate that. And figure out the why. What's the purpose? Why are you doing this thing? Because if you don't know why, then it's tough to be motivated. Another thing that's interesting about motivation is that it seems to be that a moderate amount of challenge is also important over the long term. That if something's too easy, we're not interested. If it's too hard, we're not interested. But there's a sweet spot between those where we're sort of intellectually and physically and emotionally challenged that's rewarding because we feel like we're having a sense of accomplishment then. And from a motivational standpoint, the positive rewards and immediate positive rewards seem to work a lot better than a potential punishment that's far in the distance. So we want to try to find those rewards as early as possible. And finding that motivation is key because it's tough. It's tough to do these things and it's tough to make changes, especially when we're living in a pandemic time. So the other thing I want to note and mention and reflect on is this idea of self-care and this idea of community care. And Dr. Greg already talked about the example of a garden. I think that's a wonderful example. But this idea that self-care is not, it has to grow beyond just taking care of myself to taking care of my community. Because thriving is a collective responsibility. If we're going to go from surviving to thriving, that's not something I can do myself. That's something my community has to do together. And so individual care is one part of that. If we're taking care of a garden, and we're only taking care of one plant and watering that one plant and picking all the weeds out from around that one plant might do well for a little while, but eventually the soil around it is going to deteriorate and the weeds are going to creep in and the rest of the garden is going to be in trouble. So we have to also take care of our communities because it's our communities that will thrive together, and thriving is a responsibility of everybody. It's not just on us to thrive. And I think that's really important because sometimes all we can do individually is survive. And for some of us, that's the best we can do, and that's okay. Because thriving takes everybody working together. So sometimes, though, thriving, even surviving, feels impossible. Feels like it's too hard, it's too much. There's a really famous story by Dr. Seuss called "All the Places You'll Go," and you'll see all sorts of kind of motivational and inspirational quotes in that story from Dr. Seuss, but I actually really like this one. Except when they don't, because sometimes they won't. Because life doesn't always go the way we planned. We don't always get what we wanted. And there's no truer time than that right now in COVID-19. And sometimes we need to recognize when do we need to consider seeking out that professional help? When does that balance tip? Sadly, every year in Alberta, 500 to 600 people die by suicide. So there is real risk. So the things to look for are, when is it going from, it's normal to have some stress for a week, it's normal to have some stress even for a month, it's normal to have some difficult times, but when that's going on for a long time, that chronic stress that Dr. Corral has talked about, when you stop being able to enjoy the things you once enjoyed, you stop going out to go skiing, or you stop calling friends that you used to call. Somebody says, hey, do you want to go for a walk together, go for a hike, and you say, don't really have the time. When your personality starts to change, you stop showing up at work, or you're calling in sick all the time. You can't show up for your kids or your family. So that's when you know that you need to seek out some extra support and some extra help. Because we want to make sure that everybody possible lives through this pandemic. And sometimes that requires asking for help. And you can turn to lots of different places. Your family doctor, your naturopath, FCSS here in Cochrane is a great resource. Cochrane Mental Health. There's all sorts of programs and people out there willing to help you. Please ask for that help. So I'm going to close out tonight just by showing you a couple of phone numbers. There's lots out there. You can do some Googling. But these are kind of the key numbers or key information, I think, for the Cochrane community. Obviously, if there's ever an emergency, 911 is always an option and always available to you. All of the major hospitals in Calgary have emergency supports available 24/7, 365 for both your physical health and your mental health. So all the emergency rooms have a mental health team and its staff every day of the year, every hour of the day. In a crisis, not a life-threatening emergency, there's the distress line, which is 403-266-HELP. If you're actually seeking out ongoing therapy and counseling, so looking for that kind of treatment piece, the best way to access that is through Access Mental Health. So that's the phone number you would call there, and it's available during regular business hours. And what they do is they go through a sort of brief screening and questionnaire with you on the phone, and then kind of talk about different options for treating your mental health at this time. And one of those options is Cochrane Mental Health. Sometimes there's also other options that are available to people depending on the circumstances and what's happening. And then last but not least, in Cochrane, we do have an urgent mental health program. It is operated out of the Cochrane Community Health Center and Urgent Care. And it's available noon till 7, Monday to Friday, and Saturdays and Sundays from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And they are right now providing both some telephone-based services and some in-person-based services at the Urgent Care Center for folks that need it. Yeah. So, in closing, be kind to yourself. Self-care is difficult and hard. Take small actions. And please, if you need help, help is there for you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. If you want to stick around, you can come back. We're just taking a look at the questions that are coming in. They're awesome questions. The first ones I think that you can maybe answer. So if you want to come back up, I'll just be at the side. You'll hear my voice asking the questions. Eric, the first questions are, my kid is typically an active kid. With the snow flying and his usual extracurricular programs canceled due to COVID, how can I support physical activity?
Thanks, that's a great question. I think probably this is going to be a winter where we see lots of individuals and families look at really creative outdoor activities, right? So activities where they can be socially distanced and outside and physically active, whether that's skiing, snowshoeing, hiking. We live here in Cochrane and we have lots of great access to the mountains and to West Bragg Creek. So I think it's going to be a winter where we have to be creative about what that looks like, because a lot of the indoor programs are going to be different.
Mm-hmm. And then another question that's similar is worrying about the long winter being cooped up. How can I support my mental health during the winter months?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And a tricky one, right? I think that's a struggle that comes up for individuals every single winter. And I think it'll be definitely more pronounced this winter. I know for my family, a regular winter trip was up for Science Center, zoo, really like going to the bike park in Calgary that was indoors. So I think one of the things that people are going to have to focus on is going to be spending time outside, getting out even on those cold days, finding some way to connect with others, right? Whether that's, love the idea of Zoom yoga groups, finding some way of being there in connection with other people as much as we can in a safe and sort of socially distant way. And then the other thing I think people can take on and think about for this winter time is, can I see this as an opportunity to learn something new or try something new, take some online courses, mentally engage over the winter, so that, it's not feeling so long and dreary, because those long dark nights are coming.
And so when it does get to maybe the point of having to support others when they're not practicing self-care or even maybe feeling suicidal thoughts or unhealthy things, how do you support a loved one?
How does like a family member support a loved one?
Yeah, when you finally get to that point of I can't, I won't.
Yeah. So I think a couple of things that are important to know that I always chat with folks about. So I mean, obviously the first and most important thing would be, if that person's in immediate danger, you can always call 911 and paramedics and police would respond and would assess that person and then bring them to a hospital for further assessment if they needed it. I think the other thing that's important to know is that distress phone number that was up on the screen, you can call that even if you're concerned about a loved one in your family. And so they can kind of talk you through some of what you might want to ask them or some of what you might want to do in that situation. So you don't actually need to be the person that's in distress calling that phone number. You could call about a family member that you had concerns of. And I think in the most caring and kind way, one of the language tricks that I like in asking somebody that is struggling is just being really factual and just saying something like, Bob, I really noticed that you're not going for your morning walks anymore. You seem grumpier in the evening. Is there anything that we should talk about? And using that language of noticing versus saying you've got some problems and you need to fix these problems. It just sort of stays with the facts and just gives the person an opportunity, because sometimes we don't even know when we're struggling. It's our loved ones that notice first, right? And so they might be a bit of that early warning detection system that says, hey, this isn't good. Like, we need to get some support with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, we have a few more questions. I'll just sanitize. And Eric, I've noticed that you don't want to go hiking as much, that you're reading a lot lately in the bedroom. So I'm worried about you. Dr. Greg, can you come back up? We have some questions. People would like to know more a little bit about vitamins. So, vitamin C, vitamin D, are there benefits to taking these during this time?
Yeah, and for everyone, it's going to be a little bit different. I can't say yes or no to everybody. For vitamin D, I really like getting people checked. You could be that one random person that has too much in your system, and too much is a bad thing. It's a fat-soluble vitamin. It stays in your body, and you use it, and if you keep adding, it can cause more harm than damage, or harm than good. So that is when I really like people getting checked, especially this time of year, because it's supposed to be the highest right now. We've just finished summer, and we have a lot in our system. That being said, vitamin D there's some really cool research coming out showing that it might be as effective as a flu shot. I'm not saying don't get your flu shot, but that's if we have the benefit of both, it's great. Vitamin C, everybody is different. It can cause diarrhea if you take too much. But people who are fighting off viruses seem to be able to take more. So if some people who are sick, they can take up to 10,000 units or milligrams every day. It helps the cell. Keep touching my face.
I'll spray you.
It helps the cells work effectively. It's kind of like taking out the trash. So it takes the trash out of the cells and really helps our cells work properly. And so, yeah, some people can take up to 10,000 a day, but most of us, it's more around 2,000. But that is something that I do have to stress, talk with a healthcare professional to make sure that that amount is right for you. And or if you get diarrhea, we want to make sure that you're not getting enough, that it lowers your blood pressure, that it can make you fall over and faint because you're taking too much vitamin C. It's rare, but I just want to stress that vitamins are told to be good, but there are limits to how good each vitamin is.
We've had another question come in. Vegetarians and vegans, what do you recommend if they can't take bone broth or different protein sources?
Well, there are a lot of different protein sources out there. So beans have protein, mushrooms have some proteins. It depends on what kind of vegan or vegetarian you are too. Some vegans or vegetarians will eat clams or mussels because they don't have a nervous system, so they're not technically an animal. So they feel more comfortable having that kind of protein level.
So you could make a broth out of the clams or the seafood components then? Okay.
Yeah,
Fish.
and well, not depending if it's a vegan, not so much. And it depends on if they're more pescatarian versus vegetarian. so yeah, it's just because people are vegan or vegetarians, there are plant-based proteins out there. So hemp hearts are one of my favorites because it's 2 tablespoons and you get your allotted about 20 grams of protein for that meal, just with 2 tablespoons of flax or hemp hearts. Chia seeds are really good too. I think it's only 6 grams per tablespoon. But yeah, there are lots of different sources of proteins out there.
Thank you, Dr. Greg.
You're welcome.
Thanks. And Dr. Jennifer, we have some questions for you as well. Someone is asking, I believe I might have had COVID prior to March. I'm suffering from weird complaints, skin issues, fatigue. I understand there are effects of COVID. After effects, What is known about these after effects of COVID?
This question was submitted previous to the talk, and the way I've decided to answer this question is to take a time out. I think I'm going to use the form that we're using and make sure that I answer the question thoughtfully and completely. And I would like to be able to post it to the site. Is that possible, guys? There was talk that it was done recently with with many physicians, and it did detail what we're finding out now as to how to monitor people and what the long-term effects are. But again, it's only been 10 months, and a lot of the research has been how to get people out of the hospital and help them survive through the first stages of the pandemic. So I would like to be able to take some time, and I'll post that as soon as I can.
Absolutely.
What can people look for in terms of?
Send it to me and I'll post it.
Sounds great.
Yeah,
Okay.
on our
so
Facebook Live feed.
That sounds good. I will have that in the next couple of days.
So you didn't hear that. It will be posted on the Facebook Live feed. One more question for you. Is the antibody test available yet?
The antibody test is available and it's being done, but more in scientific research settings. It is not widely used in the population.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have one more little scenario, a little story to tell you. I'm anxious about COVID-19. How do I make sure I'm not transferring my anxiety to my children, whom I'm working with? And in my job, I'm dealing with parents who are extremely anxious, and they seem to be overwhelming their children unnecessarily. So how do I best address this without creating high conflict responses, yet giving them the message that I'm addressing their concern? So I'm assuming the parents. So you have a parent that is at home with kids, sometimes homeschooling, and then you're also feeling extremely anxious yourself. You don't want your kids to feel this way. So Eric, maybe you could come up and tell us a little bit about not trying to give advice to parents and create a high conflict situation and get the message across for their concern, because I think that a lot of families are feeling this.
Thanks. It's a good question. It's tough when we're ourselves sort of worried as parents. How do we handle that, or how do we share that with our kids in an age-appropriate way? So I think a couple of things that are important to think about here. I think the first and foremost is sort of limiting some of your own news and social media consumption, and really focusing on a few sources that you know you can trust. And then with your kids and children, sort of being really clear and sticking to the facts. So really trying to be cautious about how much information they're getting or how much information they're sharing, what they're overhearing in the background. Kids don't always hear the whole story, so they'll catch just a snippet of conversation from downstairs, or they'll catch a snippet of conversation from another room. And we have to be careful, because then they'll try to fill in the details themselves in their minds, and they come up with all sorts of scenarios that are really far from the truth in those situations. And then I think the other thing we need to think about as parents or caregivers in that situation is that the kids might see us struggle, but then they don't usually see us doing the self-care, because we're doing that when they're out of the house, or we're doing that after they're in bed. So thinking about how can I, even if it's strategically, how can I sort of demonstrate or show to them that I'm taking steps to cope with my own worry and fear about this situation, and letting them see you do that a little bit. Because I think sometimes that children aren't exposed as much to that. They're just seeing the sort of anxiety in the day, but they aren't necessarily seeing the coping that's happening outside of the home or happening in the evenings after they're in bed. And then can you read the question again? Because I think there were some other pieces to it or some other things you were...
The first part was about your own anxiety not transferred to your children.
Yeah.
And then dealing with parents. Sometimes we are working with parents. They're extremely anxious and they seem to be overwhelming their children.
Okay.
And the third part was, how do I best address the anxiety the parents are having without creating high conflict response, like maybe defensiveness to the parent, yet give them the message that I am addressing their concern. So how do you give advice when someone is anxious and overwhelmed, and maybe in a way that they could hear that message? How do you get that to come through?
Yeah, I think that could be a really challenging conversation. I think the first piece that comes up for me is oftentimes what folks are needing when people are turning the volume up on their distress, they're usually needing some form of validation, or they're needing somebody to acknowledge that their concern or their fear or their worry is real. And so we have to separate validation from agreement. So if we're going to validate somebody's fear or worry, that doesn't necessarily mean we're agreeing with that fear or worry, but we can sort of make some statements sort of acknowledging that this is real stress in their life, that this is a real concern that they have. And then trying to provide really consistent information for them. So I think a really great example or parallel for me is these updates by the Chief Medical Officer of Health, where Dr. Hinshaw has been really good about trying to be very clear, very consistent, very pointed about the information that she delivers. And she also delivers it, if you notice or pay attention to her tone of voice or body language, she's very calm and matter of fact, right? Sort of, these are the facts, this is what's happening. There's not a lot of drama about it. And so that kind of response and body language tends to also calm the person that you're dealing with. Whereas if you yourself are animated, and in distress, that's going to usually only amplify the distress the other person's experiencing. And then I think providing a clear avenue for concerns, right? So if somebody doesn't know where do they get their voice heard, they try to get their voice heard in as many different spots as possible. So thinking about, can we create a space or a spot or a person or a way that this person or these people can ensure that their concerns are heard, because they are valid concerns. And so part of the reason you might be dealing with it is because we haven't given them an appropriate spot to sort of express that question or that concern.
That makes a lot of sense.
Does that help?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Anything else?
I think that is all of our questions.
Okay.
Nicole, any more in the chat?
Nope, nothing.
No? Okay. Well, thank you. I learned a lot tonight. I hope that all of you watching did and found it very enjoyable. I know when I go home tonight, I'm going to be singing all the way in the car, and I'm going to read some Dr. Seuss and maybe gargle, but not with mouthwash. And I definitely want a pumpkin pie blizzard. I don't know why. So I'd like to thank the Social Recovery Task Force for hosting tonight. These community conversations are invaluable. And just thank our expert panel of speakers once again. Please keep safe, keep your spirits high, and remember, if you have to go poo, go poo. Thank you.